Greetings, this is an introductory video to History 201, The Historian's Craft, an introduction to the study of history. So first I think it would be good just to look at the course description. This course aims to introduce history students to the study of their discipline and to the techniques underlying historical study and research, the critique of primary and secondary sources, specific trends in historical interpretation, such as various schools of historiography, the Chicago style of documentation and bibliography, and the composition of thesis statements, papers, and reviews. The prerequisites are English 102 and a 100-level general education history course. This course is for 3 credit hours. Now, one thing I want to emphasize, right, this is a course for people who are majors or who are seriously considering the major. If you don't fill any of those categories, you should drop the course, because this is not an easy course. Like I said, it's aimed for people who really love history. In fact, I would argue that this is the history flunk out course, right? This is the course where some people say, I don't want to be a history major, and they leave. So if you're seriously considering being a history major, then it's fine. But if you're just like, I just need a course and I'm taking this, you want to drop this class. So as part of this course, you will do the following. First, you will become familiar with the basic principles and schools of historiography. You may ask yourself, what is historiography? In a sense, it's the history of history. In particular, how have people from different times, different worldviews understood history differently? The ancient Greeks had one particular or multiple particular understandings of history, a lot of times based on their theology, how they understood the gods. Christians developed their own understanding of history that would, of course, be focused on the idea of God intervening in this world and history having an endpoint in the second coming of Jesus. Marxists, the followers of Karl Marx, developed a history that focused not on God's intervention in the world, but on the importance of economic factors as being more important than anything else. So we'll understand how the different ways historians have understood history, the different interpretive frameworks they've used. Second, you will become familiar with a particular content area. So in this class, we rotate. Different professors teach this class. It's not just me. And we can do that because it's a skills-based class. It's not based necessarily on any things that we're necessarily experts in, though we tend to focus on areas we know something about. The key thing is not the particular content. The content is just there as a way to practice the skills and to develop those skills. So now, I'm a specialist in Asia and religion, and so I was planning on doing this on Korea. But instead, I decided to do it on the history of disease because we had the COVID-19 crisis. Right, so I decided to focus on that. So my content area for this class will be the history of disease. Thirdly, you will write a book review on a book on disease chosen by the instructor. So you're going to learn how to read a book properly, an academic book, a monograph, right? It's a certain kind of book, has a thesis, which you can agree or disagree with. It's one I choose, so we'll all be reading the same book together so we can discuss it, and you'll write a book review on it, and I will give you guidance on how to do that. Fourthly, you will locate and analyze primary and secondary sources related to a topic within the history of disease. In consultation with me, you will choose that topic. So this is where this class can be difficult because you're kind of on your own. You're the one that has to do this, though I will guide you. And it should be fun, though, because it's an area where you get some room to decide what particular historical disease do you want to look at. Fifthly, you will construct an annotated bibliography and footnotes in accordance with Chicago-style guidelines based on your research on your topic. So you find the primary and secondary sources, and then you prepare a bibliography in accordance with Chicago style, right? There's always different ways you do bibliographies, always different ways you do footnotes. You'll do that with Chicago style. And so you will be taught that. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the term bibliography. You may not be so familiar with the term annotated bibliography. So what do I mean by that? That's when you tell us something about those primary and secondary sources. So an annotation is kind of like an explanation. So beneath each source, you would give us certain information about them. Don't worry, I'll talk more about that in detail when that assignment when we're ready to start that assignment. Sixth, you would write a historiographic paper based upon items 4 and 5. So historiographic paper is where you're going to look at how different people have understood the disease you're talking about and how those understandings have changed over time or based on the school of thought of the person looking at the disease. A Marxist historian may view things differently than an intellectual historian. So you're going to learn how to do that, how to apply what you learned about the basic principles and schools of historiography to talk about how people have understood your topic in different ways based on what you learned from 4. And finally, you will write a term paper with a clearly defined thesis. So you're making an argument. This isn't a report. You're not simply summarizing what other people are saying. You're going to write a term paper with a clearly defined thesis connected to the book review book. So you've read that book review book, you understand that book, that person makes an argument. Now you're going to make an argument about some aspect of that person's argument based on the research on your disease, where you use that to either agree or disagree with what that person said in that book, backed up by the research you've done. So, like I said, this is a skills-based class. It's not so much just learning about disease and historiography, though you have to do that. You also have to apply that to actually make projects. It's not simply exams, right? You're not just simply choosing A, B, C, or D. You are making an argument. By the way, this is why pre-law is something that is one reason why history majors will also be pre-law, because this is all about learning to argue. Now, I need to also talk about what history is and what historians do. So first of all, one definition you can give of history is the study of change over time. Right? We study the past and how it's changed. Why is it that we view the world differently now than we did 100 years ago? Why is it that we have the ability to make things that people could not make 500 years ago? Right? Why did that happen? How does that happen? And typically we use written sources. That's because that's what remains. So you can also use archaeological sources, movies now, things like that. But typically it's writing. That's why reading is such an important skill in learning history. And in particular, we focus on the causes of change over time. So we talk about that development, but it's also important we try and understand why that development happened. Like I said, why is it that between the years 1500 and 2000, you have this massive change in what human beings are able to manufacture and in our scientific understanding of the world? Why does that happen? So historians are people who study this change over time, typically using written sources, though we can use other sources, and why that change occurred. Now, one thing that's really cool about this class, and this again is what makes it hard, but also what makes it fun and great and awesome and why I like teaching it, is you go from being a consumer of history, a history buff, someone who watches History Channel or listens to history podcasts or reads history books or goes to museums, and those are all awesome things. I'm not criticizing that at all. That's awesome. But you're going to go from someone who simply consumes history to a producer of history, a scholar, perhaps an amateur one, but an actual historian. That's what I think is so cool about this. Instead of just sitting back and listening to me talk or a professor talk, and you can learn a lot from that, you're going to be learning on your own, and you might find something new about the past. You may help us to understand the past in a different way. Those are things you're not going to do so much in a 100-level history class. There, you're just kind of consuming history. But here you're learning how to produce history. Now you may say, well, wait a second, how can you produce history? It's not like you can make it up. And that's not what I mean. Historians have to choose selectively among the sources we use. We have to choose. We have to organize the sources to tell a story. That's what I mean about being a producer of history. It's not that you're making things up, but you're putting things together, you're analyzing them in new ways, and you're making an argument. You're telling a story about the past. And that's what's awesome about being a historian. We're kind of like detectives and storytellers all wrapped up together. And in this class, you start to learn how to do that. That's why it's so cool. And I would point out that historians, you can kind of think about this, I use the acronym ASK, we analyze historical documents and synthesize their findings. You take a bunch of different documents, you kind of put them together, you figure out what they tell us about the past, and then we communicate those findings either through speaking or through writing. And typically in this class, you're going to have to learn to do both. You have to write and you have to speak. Finally, I would just stress these are useful skills in a data-saturated age. It's very important to be able to do this. You may not work in a job directly connected to history, but every job you're going to have will require that you be able to analyze, synthesize, and communicate information. And this class can help you to develop those very, very important skills. Now, I have to give you some bad news. This will probably be one of the hardest courses you will take at university. It will probably be the hardest history course. And you may say, well, why is that? It's just a 200-level course, right? It's not that different from a 100-level course. Surely a 300-level or 400-level history course should be more difficult. Well, The key thing that makes this difficult is the jump from a 100 level class to a 200 level class. They're very different. In a 100 level history class, such as my world history classes I teach, it's some videos, I lecture, you write down what I say or what's in the videos, you fill out the study guides, you answer the questions on exam, you write a couple papers that are mostly just kind of summaries or reports, and you're done, boom, you get your A. In this course, it's very different because it's not going to be so much just me lecturing and you just giving me back what I lecture. You're expected to do your own independent research. Right? This is a course where you're expected to be more active, and it's that transition from being a passive learner to an active learner that I think really makes it difficult for some people. It's not easy, and it is a big jump between 1 and 200 level. Between 2 and 300 level, the jump is not that big, and the 400 level, the 499 class, you have to take the capstone class. It's not easy, but it's basically just using the skills that you learn here. So this one's harder because you're going to be learning new skills. You're going to be moving from this kind of passive to a more active style of learning. So that's the bad news. So what's the good news then? The good news is this will either be one of the most interesting or beneficial courses you will take, or it will convince you that you're in the wrong major and you should change it. Both those are good conclusions. Both those are good results. You're either going to get a lot out of this class. You're going to be like, wow, now I can totally do research. I can do things on my own. I don't need someone looking after me. I don't need someone telling me how to do things. I can do it. And wow, was it so interesting to pursue my own area of research, to read books that I choose to read articles that I choose to read based on a topic that I choose. That's one thing that's really cool. Being a historian is awesome. Doing historical research is awesome. It's so much fun. I love it, which is why that is my chosen career path. Or it's going to convince you to change majors. You're going to say, oh, this is terrible. And this is not a bad thing. To give you an example, I had a history major who was a pre-law minor. And she's like, oh, I don't like this class. I'm like, well, why don't you like this class? She's like, it's so boring. I don't like reading these books. It's so boring. It's like, ma'am, you're in the wrong major and you're looking at the wrong career path. If you think these history books are boring, wait till you start reading law books, right? So that's kind of my point, right? This is going to be something that's either going to say, this is awesome, I totally picked the right major, or you're going to say, you know what, maybe I should think about something else, right? I hope most of you will decide to choose to stay history majors, but helping you determine what major you should do, that's good also. Now, I've been stressing how difficult this class is, and I think I've given you some indication why. But I want to just try and make this clear. This is a skills-based course. It is a skills-based course that will ultimately help transform you from a consumer of history to a producer of history, that is a historian. Now, why would that necessarily be difficult? Because developing skills takes time. Developing skills takes time. By the way, whenever a teacher repeats something, that's because they think it's really important. When you learn to shoot a basketball, you can't just instantly shoot it well the first time. It takes practice. You can tell I'm a Hoosier because that's the example I give. When you learn to throw a ball, it takes time. You have to repeat it over and over and over again. If you've ever watched a small child learn to walk, they have to constantly do it over and over and over and over again. And that takes time. So this is one thing I think that makes this difficult. A lot of you are probably really smart. And you're used to be able to, I've had students, I'm not kidding, who can sit in one of my 100 level history classes, not take any notes, not study, and they get A's all the time. And I know from talking to them, they're not cheating. They just have really good memories, and they're really smart, and they probably came in knowing half of what I'm talking about anyway, maybe more than half. If you're a student like that, you have to be really careful with a class like this, because this is where things get really hard for you. Because you've been able to get by and done very well with only doing a little bit of work. But this class is time consuming. It doesn't matter how smart you are. Reading a book takes time. It doesn't matter how smart you are. Writing, using Chicago style bibliography footnotes and the like, takes time. So all this stuff takes time. Now, there are some people who are natural writers who write very easily, but I think they're few and far between. And again, that's one thing I have to stress about this class. When I took the equivalent of this class as an undergraduate, I was told, you write like a Hoosier talks. Hoosier, someone from Indiana. Believe you me, that was not a compliment. That was a criticism of my writing. Now I'm able to write well enough that I can be published. I wrote a op-ed for CNN when the Pope visited Korea in 2014. I help edit a journal, an academic journal. I'm not saying this to boast. My point is, I was not a good writer, and I'm a competent writer. I don't say I'm a good writer. I don't think I'm a particularly good writer. No one's going to give me a Pulitzer Prize or anything like that. But I'm able to effectively communicate my ideas. And you can learn how to do that. You can learn how to do that better if you're already doing it. My key point is I became a better writer. I had that transformation by writing. You get better at reading by reading. You get better at writing by writing. That's why this is a hard course, because people oftentimes, frankly speaking, don't want to invest the time in the skill. But I can tell you that is time very, very well spent. It will give you a skill that can be used anywhere you go. So just to emphasize, this course is all about practice, practice, practice. You practice so much that you do it by second nature. Those skills will continue to serve you all throughout your life. And you'll have fun doing it, right? Because you're going to be learning about history to do it. So I'm looking forward on going with this journey with you. I hope that you will get a lot out of this class. I hope you will get prepared for this class, that you'll think about how in the fall you can make time to devote it to this class so that you'll do well, so that it will become an opportunity to really develop rather than just a millstone around your neck. So with all that being said, good luck, and I look forward to seeing you all.